They didn't have takeout, meal kits, or even full pantries, just a knack for turning next to nothing into dinner. This 2-hour time capsule serves up the forgotten frugal meals your grandparents used to survive, one humble bite at a time. Speaking of molasses, they also went really great with some slow-baked beans. Molasses have a knack for adding a lot of deep flavor to a dish, and the fact that these were usually left overnight to absorb all of it made for probably the best baked beans people could get in those times. It was especially popular as a summertime meal. Baked beans were not too hard to get, not the tinned versions because those were still pricey. Once you had some, you would just leave them in water to soften, and then the beans would be baked for 8 hours straight overnight. Making it was a whole day, literally. But once you were done with the prep work, it was all just a waiting game, and this was one time where being patient really paid off. Sardine and mustard sandwiches are as basic as they sound and much better than you might initially give them credit for. Be realistic and think about a post-Depression era America where a lot of neighborhoods and homes were still reeling from the effects. Dollars could buy a bit more and went back to their usual strength, but everything was a bit touch and go for a while, and dishes like sardine and mustard sandwiches were the cure. Even more attractive than the taste was the price of this beauty, because for about $1.50 you had yourself a solid meal. Many labor workers, like your friendly neighborhood forklift or dock workers, might remember eating these during their lunch breaks. People would usually spice it up with other vegetables, toppings, and peppers to make a proper feast out of a cheap thrill. And we would like to join the fun too. If you've ever walked the streets of downtown New York, I'm sure you're familiar with the infamous pastrami on rye. If your grandma's from the Big Apple, chances are her recipe is highly regarded. This sandwich became a staple in Jewish delis in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, thanks to Eastern European immigrants. This one just featured an old-fashioned slice of pastrami on rye bread and a dollop of mustard. Grandma knew that when it came to sandwiches, sometimes less is more, and pastrami on rye is the perfect example of that. But hey, don't forget no pastrami on rye is complete without a pickle on the side. The tartness of a dill pickle or the sweetness of a bread and butter pickle is the perfect contrast to the savory pastrami. The Scrapple sandwich is exactly what the name suggests: fried slices of scrapple on bread. Traditionally, this sandwich would be sliced and prepared in a skillet, under a thick layer of eggs. It definitely became popular around the Maryland to New York district, but the recipe itself is properly ancient. An 1853 extract from a cookbook advises using pork that wouldn't be suitable for sausage. It was also popular for its health benefits. It can be made in a variety of ways, and some people include crispy cabbage on top and make it into a waffle with mayo. Mix and match and see what works best for you. Maybe you'll find something worth sharing. But for now, the Scrapple sandwich can only be something you create. With its popularity last seen in the mid-1850s, this sandwich is something that we can only find in old extracts now. Brown Betties were one of the most classic American desserts to ever grace the table of an American kid. Something that might be seen as an old-fashioned dessert now, but used to be the next best thing after an apple pie. The flavors of a Brown Betty usually come from the spiced apples and other fruit-layered dishes, which are really buttery. The sugary breadcrumbs on top give it a crunch, which really adds to the entire vibe of the Brown Betty. You're looking for a warm, comforting dish that gets you in a nostalgic mood. Something you can sit down with and enjoy bite for bite, not rush through. It's an experience that you want to savor, like an empty, windy street as you walk down by and enjoy it. The Brown Betty was definitely something that would get you up out into the street, whether you were going to visit your grandma's for an authentic pie or a nearby bakery to reminisce about childhood days. The earliest recipes you can find are the ones from 1866, but those are more like Apple Betties than the ones we're talking about. Either way, this dish has definitely evolved alongside the population, and those who grew up with it will remember it fondly. You might think that boiled animal hooves are something that only a survivalist would eat, and indeed, during the Dust Bowl, they were the only thing keeping some families going. When meat became unaffordable and gelatin packets were a luxury, hooves came in handy, literally and metaphorically. Animal hooves, preferably cow or pig, were used and boiled to make a broth that was as useful and as ugly sounding as it can get in our ears today. The long cooking process tenderized collagen present in hooves and made it into a natural binder for soups, stews, and even sweets. Yes, you heard it correctly, desserts. Gelatin from hooves was the secret behind the wobble in aspics, jellies, and custards. This was not about getting by. It was about getting the most out of each part of the animal. Hooves cooked were a rich source of protein and minerals and were a great food source during the lean periods. And even though they were not the most attractive, they ensured that bellies were filled and bodies were built. Today, such concepts as boiling hooves may cause some people to have goosebumps. However, in those days, it was business as usual. Dust Bowl meals were about subsistence, and at times, subsistence entails getting creative with what is available, or hoof. Next up, a dish that sounds almost too simple to be true: tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. I know, it doesn't exactly scream gourmet, but remember, we're talking about a time when people were just trying to survive. This combo was a way to stretch those precious few ingredients. During the Great Depression, potatoes were a cheap and filling staple, and tomato sauce was an easy way to add flavor. This dish was essentially a plate of creamy mashed potatoes topped with a savory tomato sauce. It might sound a bit unusual, but this combination was a hit because it was cheap, easy to make, and comforting. Plus, potatoes were versatile. You could mash them, fry them, or bake them depending on what you had. So, if you're ever in the mood for a simple yet tasty meal, try tomato sauce with mashed potatoes. Let's see if this humble dish can impress our modern taste buds. So, for onions stuffed with grape nuts, you needed nothing that fancy, not even a lot of seasoning outside of your basic salt and pepper. All you needed was 1.5 cups of pork sausage meat, some melted fat, ketchup, and if you could spare some strips, then bacon. Of course, the key player, grape nuts, would come later when the onions would be chopped and diced mixed with the sausage and the other ingredients. This was then baked for around 40 minutes, and the outcome was a resounding yes from everyone at the dinner table. Dishes that were simple but incredibly effective at filling everyone and leaving them with a happy smile were the holy grail of the 40s and 50s. Have you ever heard of using cloth napkins and towels? They might not feel as good as the paper products we're used to and have been familiar with since the, start of our lives, but they do save a pretty penny. The thing is, all of this is a lifestyle choice. These little tips and tricks on their own might not add too much, but you buy the cloth napkin, you make the snack at home, you make a DIY detergent, and you start to see enough money bubbling up in your account at month's end. Eventually. Cornmeal mush is usually made with water or milk and is a type of pudding or porridge depending on the needs of the meal. This became incredibly widespread in the southeastern and eastern bits of America, and it makes sense given how much wartime rations were consumed there. When the government would hand those out, they would often make a point to lower sugar usage and use molasses to conserve other ingredients, so people would pair cornmeal mush along with them. Mush is a more accurate term since it does kind of land somewhere in the middle ground between a pudding and a porridge. It has the consistency of the latter, but it gels and sets like the former, which gives it a slightly airy texture too. Did you know it would not be cooked in milk though? That was set after the mush was prepared to cool it down. Bologna and potato salad sandwiches were just as effective at getting the entire family on the table and doubling as the perfect school lunch for your kid. Grade 5 or high school, none of that mattered, because even adults well into their career enjoyed these. People working long jobs would pack a bologna and potato salad sandwich in their backpack to ensure all their food needs were met. Often you would come into a home around the afternoon and find kids glued to the TV with a bologna and potato salad sandwich in hand. Mixing in some chicken chunks or chips would only upgrade an already stellar dish, and we definitely want potato salads and this sandwich to make a comeback. Liverwurst might not be everyone's cup of tea, but for those who loved it, there was nothing quite like a liverwurst sandwich. So, liverwurst, or liver sausage, has German roots and is a staple in many European countries. The name liverwurst comes from the German words Leber, which means liver, and Wurst, which means sausage. This one was also made with rye bread and was a common street food in the streets of New York. Grandma gave it a home-like feel by using homemade bread and using fresh veggies and toppings like mustard, pickles, or onions. Grandma knew that liverwurst sandwiches were a bit of a specialty, something that not everyone would appreciate. But for those who did, it was a real treat. The bacon and peanut butter sandwich was one that caught our eyes the most. Crispy bacon paired with peanut butter sounded like a combination that could just work somehow. This was a no-brainer for Americans. If their left kidney is sustained by peanut butter, the right is sustained by bacon. Both together probably provide just the right amount of fuel to get through the day or a grueling 9-to-5 shift. A great condiment to go with this is unsweetened ketchup, because most ketchups today have artificial sweeteners. This isn't as popular as it used to be, but it hasn't declined enough in renown that it's that outlandish of an idea. Give it a try some weekend, you might be pleasantly surprised. Sautéed or caramelized onions provide just the right complementary flavor to the crispy bacon, while also not overloading your taste buds because of the peanut. I know for a fact you've all grown up on some of your grandparents' baked ziti, especially if you have some Italian roots, and if you do, then you share that in common with this dish. Right from the streets of Italy, immigrants first brought this dish over in the middle of the 19th century throughout the early start of the 20th one, so it had a lot of time to become something that people could love and associate with the finer things in life. People had a lot of time by the mid-20th century to try this dish, and plenty of families had passed their own secret baked ziti recipes down. The baked ziti really hit its highest highs during that time period in the 1950s to the 1970s, and it was something you could enjoy at both a potluck and a fancy at-home date. It was a staple of Italian-American cooking, and you could even find it at weddings. I, for one, think that really speaks to how popular the dish was, but what's your experience with this dish? And if you don't have any yet, is it something you'd ever try out? Carrot tops, the lost greens that were anything but lost during the Dust Bowl. When fresh vegetables were out of season, nothing was thrown away, not even the green tops of carrots. Carrot top salad made these usually discarded greens into a rather healthy meal. The greens were chopped, dressed with vinegar or lemon juice, and combined with any leftovers of vegetables or wild greens that could be found. If you were really fancy, you might add some more olive oil or a dash of salt. The result? A sharp, sour dish that was anything but luxurious, but was instead a nutritionist's dream. Carrot tops have a robust, somewhat pungent taste, so they are considered a luxury item in today's terms. However, as they say, when the going gets tough, the tough get eating, and Dust Bowl families were certainly tough. Fun fact, carrot tops are not only edible, but also rich in nutrients such as vitamin K and other vitamins and minerals. I'd like to try this salad, perhaps, if there is enough dressing to offset the bitterness. It is not something I would run for, but I do appreciate the creativity of using leftovers to get food. If there is one thing that the Dust Bowl did, it showed that although survival may not always be pretty, it is always impressive. Another meatless option, lima bean and peanut loaf, was a creative way to get your protein during the Depression. It's made by combining cooked lima beans, peanut butter, and breadcrumbs to form a loaf. The result was a savory loaf with a nutty flavor and a satisfying texture. It was an excellent meatless option for families looking to stretch their food budget. Plus, it was a great way to use up leftover beans and peanuts, ensuring nothing went to waste. Lima bean loaf allegedly tastes a bit like falafel, but is best with lots of highly seasoned gravy. This dish might sound a bit unusual, but it was a creative solution to a common problem: getting enough protein without emptying their pockets. Think of a crispy and tender potato cake that has the perfect crunch to it too, and you have yourself a potato flauty. Potatoes were an ingredient that the horrendous war had not taken away from people, along with other basic necessities like wheat. So dishes involving potatoes saw a huge increase in popularity, and some rather forgotten ones like potato flauties got a whole new chance at life. Originally, it is popularly believed that canal workers came up with this oldie but goldie dish when they would cook grated potatoes over fires until they were golden brown. Whether they did invent the dish or not, it definitely was a comfort food for masses everywhere, and we can easily see why too. Considered classic 40s junk food, we would love to try a good authentic potato flotty today. Another nifty little trick people could really benefit from is using ebooks or old textbooks bought secondhand instead of fresh new ones. Let's be honest, these are starting to cost a lot, and the pursuit of knowledge is never something you should be financially exempt from. Not that people aren't, but at least you should be able to read your books without worrying about how it's going to affect your finances for the month, right? If that sounds like you, and if reading is a passionate hobby, or if you're just a student who's struggling to save some cash, then buying used textbooks might be a good idea. Potatoes had more use than just what was under all the layers. Once peeled, people would often fry the potato skins as a midday snack. Nothing would ever go to waste in homes back then, as you must have gathered by now. If they can make stuff out of sausage drippings and drain the fat from bacon to reuse, frying up some potato skins does not seem that out of the box at all. These fried skins were the perfect sidekick to potato pancakes, and the fact that the skins had a lot of health benefits made it all the more appealing. Things like this really helped to keep appetites in check, and that meant that the financial situation of the home would be calmer too. Ham and banana sandwiches are less digestible both literally and figuratively than most of the list, but they actually worked quite well. The trick was in how you sliced them, because if the banana slices were fat and thick while the ham was thin, you would have a really overly sweet sandwich. Meanwhile, if you did the opposite, then you would have a mushy sandwich that did not have any real flavor. If you did get the proportions right, and most people did after their first few tries, then you had a 70s DIY delicacy with simple ingredients. It made sense why most people did not know how to make a good one, because it was not common. People who lived in other decades hated fruit and meat mixes of savory dishes, but they had a lot more room to make an impression with the crowd in the 70s. Maybe people felt very tropical for a decade? The sandwich would be quite an interesting addition in menus today. If there's one sandwich you can never go wrong with, it's the old-fashioned grilled cheese sandwich. This one is the epitome of comfort food, and Grandma's version was a childhood favorite. Even the pickiest eaters used to beg for this one. So this one became popular during the Great Depression era, when we had to make do with three of the most common ingredients in our pantries: bread, cheese, and butter. Now, some of us used to get creative with our grilled cheese by adding extras like sliced tomatoes, ham, bacon, or even pickles. But this one was best enjoyed simple and plain. Oh, and let's not forget, it tastes even better when paired with a warm bowl of tomato soup. Before burgers and fries, grilled cheese and tomato soup used to be the ultimate food combo of our dreams. The best part? Most cheese sandwiches are vegetarian and can easily be made vegan by adjusting the type of cheese and oil. The creamed corn sandwich was easy and quick to make. With just some creamed corn on buttered bread, you had a good lunch ready. Now, this used to be a lunch many people would pick for their long work days, but recently it has taken a nosedive in popularity. Of course, the vegan crowd still loves it as an alternative, but only a surprisingly 0.66% restaurants offer creamed corn sandwiches on their menus. Still, let's say you're trying to watch what you eat. Any better option than a creamy corn sandwich? Maybe, but you'd be hard-pressed to find one this easy to make. All you need is spices of your choice, some veggies like tomatoes and onions, or iceberg lettuce or slightly toasted cabbage, a good spreading of creamed corn, flat loaf bread, and you'll have this delicious sandwich that has now faded into the past. A sandwich that many do not even know exists. We're going to go forward in time a bit, all the way to the beginning of what most people consider the late 20th century, where stuffed zucchini boats first started becoming something you would hear about regularly. At bars, from your friends and colleagues, or your partners. They became really hot in the 60s and 70s, when it felt like everyday people were trying another dish from a new country that hadn't really touched base in America yet. It was the first time people expanded their taste buds beyond the bacon, pancake, and hash brown breakfasts they were mostly used to. Plus, stuffed zucchini boats were really healthy. They were a lot better to eat than those aforementioned breakfasts. The best part was that you could really change up the fillings, so depending on what you wanted, you could have fully vegetarian zucchini boats or ones with ground beef stuffings. People say this is a part of Italian-American cooking, but a lot of Mediterranean cooking makes use of dishes similar to zucchini boats, like using stuffed peppers and vegetables like eggplants. Skunk stew. Even when the Dust Bowl left dinner plates empty, people were not the only ones who could not escape being eaten. Not even skunks. Now, before you start gagging, let me explain. Skunks were not the preferred source of protein, but when the resources were scarce, the farmers made do with whatever they could hunt down. Cooking skunk stew was not for the faint-hearted. First, you had to, de-skunk the skunk. It was mandatory to have the scent glands removed unless one wanted the house cleared faster than a tornado. After washing, it was cooked with what vegetables and spices were available. The result? A rather soft and gamey meal that was palatable though, but not one that would make me eagerly look forward to the next meal. Skunks may sound like the butt of some jokes, but these animals were a good source of protein food when all else was scarce. And can you imagine? A skunk was not as smelly as other wild games like raccoon or possum? Talk about a backhanded compliment. While skunk stew appears to be the epitome of the challenge-accepted food that is popular today for the survivors of the Dust Bowl, it was a symbol of survival. They made desperation into dinner. As they say, where there is life, there is a chance to live, and sometimes to live, you have to eat the wild, literally. Prune pudding. Sounds delicious, right? Nothing unusual about this one. It was a classic hit. Prunes were a popular choice during the Depression because they were cheap, stored well, and were, well, let's just say, effective. Many prominent figures during the 1930s ate frugally, just as most Americans did during the Great Depression. To promote the support of frugal and thrifty eating, Eleanor Roosevelt served prune pudding at formal White House functions. And that's how prunes became all the rage. The fruit was cooked until soft, mashed up, mixed with water and sugar, and a bit of flour or cornstarch to thicken it up. This dessert might not win any beauty contests, but it was a sweet treat that many families enjoyed. Prunes are not the most, luxurious of items out there. I'm sure you pass by prunes in the grocery store without even glancing at them, but they were a lifesaver for our taste buds back in the day. You know what that calls for? A place for them in your cart next time you go grocery shopping. Eggless sponge cakes might be a concept that you cannot imagine or wrap your head around today, but back then, a lot of people skipped the eggs entirely. What people used instead were margarine, sugar, and syrups to get the same vibe. What you got was a crowd entirely in favor of a sponge cake that was airy, fluffy, and made the best of your resources. Wartime brings out the frugality in everyone, but in this case it brought out the inner baker with a quick fix or workaround for everything. If you did not have ingredients or could not spare them, then you did not have to worry. You could still enjoy a yummy dessert with your family, and this is a testament to human creativity and how even the bleakest of situations can never kill your sweet tooth. Repurposing old clothes helped a lot too. Lots of families would basically live off of hand-me-downs and reused clothes that needed a bit of work. They'd take a sweater, sew up the holes on it, trade a potato for some shoelaces, stuff like that. While of course today we get the privilege of not having to go that far, we can still take a page out of their book. Clothes are meant to be reused and worn again and again, and I'm sorry if TikTok brain rot has convinced you that you need to constantly update your wardrobe so you can serve looks every single time you step out. It's okay. Wear the black tee again. No one is going to care. Depression cake and war cake are just a few of the titles this cake has. It proved that even if things were economically bad, people still had a sweet tooth. It was not just a silly craving, but a sign of comfort and a reminder of more normal days. After all, actual cake was way out of the question when people had to live off of $5 a week and feed their entire families along with it. Depression cake, as glum as it sounds, was a very welcome addition to most people's baking roster since it substituted milk with water, baking powder with eggs, and shortening instead of butter. This significantly reduced the cost of making a cake, and it was one of the things that started mock cuisine in America. A basic two-ingredient combo like meat spreads and cheese would continue making their mark with dishes like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. Salami itself was something that Italian-American communities heavily popularized in America around the early 1900s. Restaurants would take the trend and turn it into a surefire facet of American cooking in the 70s with easy and accessible ideas like salami and cream cheese sandwiches. If it works in restaurants, then the next step to making it a long-lasting memory is to make it simple enough for people to eat at home. Cream cheese, some salami, and white bread understood the assignment perfectly, and despite fading away later on, were a beloved sandwich. If you had any Italian family or were in a primarily European neighborhood, you could definitely expect to catch a whiff of these around the block. Maybe cheeses used to be stronger then? Either way, we would love to try this sandwich from the 1970s. Florida was known for its delicious sandwiches, and grandmas in the Sunshine State were masters at making the Cuban sandwich. It was brought to the States by Cuban immigrants and instantly became the talk of the town in Tampa and Miami. Traditionally, Cuban sandwiches were pressed in a sandwich press, or plancha, which gave them their distinctive crispy crust. Grandma knew the secret to a great Cuban sandwich was in the press. The sandwich had to be pressed just right, so that the bread was crispy and the cheese melted, but the inside was still warm and full of flavor. There's even a special day to celebrate this sandwich. National Cuban Sandwich Day is celebrated on August 23rd each year. Make sure to mark your calendars. As grim as the name might sound, peanut butter combined with mayo was quite a hit back in the day. In America, kids would often have this at 7 a.m. before school as breakfast they could easily put together. The sandwich was especially popular in the 30s to 60s as it was cheap and filling. Much like other sandwiches in the list, the peanut butter and mayo combination was also a product of the Great Depression. The mayo provided generous proteins that would pair well with fats from the peanut butter. In a time of financial instability, people found this sandwich to be a great way to ensure intake of important nutrients. As financial situations improved in America, this sandwich was replaced by newer and rather better-tasting options. We're going to take a bit of a deep dive into a cuisine that we haven't really explored before. I'm talking about caponata, which is a very traditional Sicilian dish that goes all the way back to the 18th century. It's supposed to be a sailor's dish. Can you believe that? It got that reputation attached to it because the birthplace of caponata was Sicily. There's no specific restaurant or name that's credited with making it, but if you ever went there, you'd know just how much the people appreciate this. The first time this became popular in America was when Mediterranean cuisine and Italian immigrants were mixing together and creating all sorts of new dishes, as well as bringing old familiar ones from their homeland. The best part about this dish for a lot of people was that it gave a chance to a vegetable, which otherwise people just aren't too fond of. I mean, eggplants aren't really the most main course-worthy idea you could think of, right? Pair that up with some tomatoes, onions, olives, and capers and cook it in vinegar, sugar, and olive oil. Make a nice little traditional agrodolce sauce, and you'll get this extremely earthy dish with a lot of complex flavors going for it. Don't underestimate the versatility of cotton. It is not only used to produce clothes. When the Dust Bowl hit, farmers learned that they could take cottonseed, no joke, it's a byproduct of cotton cultivation, and make a loaf of something that could be eaten. Cottonseed loaf was the ultimate frugal meal, the idea of turning what was essentially waste into the main course. Cottonseed was poisonous and had to be cooked to remove the poison. Then it was ground and then added to flour, water, and whatever spices and leftovers people had. It's sort of like a meatloaf's distant relative, only there is no meat and, well, there's not a whole lot of taste. The loaf was heavy, tough, and by no means delicious, but it was quite healthy to sustain the people. The idea was not entirely radical. Cottonseed is very high in protein, and since it was already being fed to animals, it was only a short jump to try it out on humans. Spoiler alert, they could, but at the cost of a little pain. When the options are between cottonseed loaf and nothing, then the cottonseed loaf does not look too bad at all. Moreover, it is a good lesson on how people have to exist with what they have, even if what they have is cotton. No, this isn't a prank. There really was a dessert called sawdust pie, and people really did make it during the Dust Bowl. And yes, sawdust was used. Back in the day, when you were out of just about everything except sugar, flour, and fruit, a vinegar cobbler was your only option. No surprise that it was also known as one of the famous Desperation pies. Desperation pies are pies in American cuisine made using staple ingredients like butter, sugar, eggs, flour, and any other ingredients that cooks had on hand to complement them or substitute for ingredients that were out of season or too expensive. These pies were more common before refrigeration and canned pie fillings, and during times of hardship like the Great Depression and rationing of World War II. When fresh fruits were hard to come by, people turned to vinegar to mimic the tartness of fruits like apples and lemons. This cobbler used a mixture of vinegar, sugar, and spices to create a filling that, when baked, tasted surprisingly similar to a fruit cobbler. Instead of chunks of fresh apples, those on a budget would use apple cider vinegar to fake the acidic taste. The crust was made from basic pantry staples like flour, sugar, and butter or lard. The dish reportedly tasted like a custard made from salt and vinegar chips, a rare dessert that leaves the roof of your mouth tingling. There is nothing like taking advantage of nature's bounty with sweet dishes like apple brown betties, and if the subject is how a pie can put you in the right mood, then it is criminal not to talk about these. Usually made with apples or pears, berries, and other seasonal common fruit, the fruit would be baked, and layers of sweetened crumbs would hold it all together. The dish was the textbook definition of comfort food, and it screamed grandma's cooking in a time where many people did not know if they would see their family again. Lots of folks were suffering from malnutrition and hunger, but pies like this, which are easy to make with natural ingredients, were a blessing. Apple brown betties are not as widely consumed today as they were during the World War, but back in the day, people found solace in the dessert they could make with whatever little they had. The recipe is commendable and might taste weird to us today because of our modern tastes. This is actually something that lots of people do today too, and I can't applaud them enough for it. Cutting your own hair is a godsend. Dude, seriously. These barbers charge around $70 for a simple lineup these days, and don't even get me started on what girls end up having to pay. You know, they all start your girlfriend's haircuts with a big chop. So why do you end up paying $100 extra? It just doesn't make sense. It might take trial and error, and you might have to get really comfortable with a hat for a few months, but learning to cut your own hair is a lifelong money saver. Pancakes and cutlets were not the only comfort cooking people made out of the vegetable we just talked about because it is oh so resourceful. Potato soup was also a regular item at the top of the menu. People would usually use whatever basic vegetables they had to make the soup more varied, but even potatoes, some grounded black pepper and water went fine. Typically, though, people would barter for a few onions or carrots to spice the soup up for special occasions or when it had been a while since they had their last good bowl of hot soup. Especially in the winters, when people needed nutrition more than ever. In about 25 minutes, you had yourself a quality and healthy meal that kept your energy going for all the labor of the week. This peanut butter and marshmallow fluff sandwiches, Liberty sandwiches, or fluffernutters, are basically just marshmallow cream on one bread and peanut butter on the other. Despite having like 3 legal government names, it is surprisingly a one-trick pony. But that one trick does wonders on an empty stomach, whether you needed a quick hit of sugar or a comfort snack to make the long shift pass by easier. These were just the sandwiches for the job. Fluffernutters also got really popular among children, and customizing them to make these cute aesthetic sandwiches was a popular hobby for kindergarten would-be chefs. Not something you would see on Hell's Kitchen, but something that puts a sweet smile on your day. Imagining the flavors is a bit difficult, so giving this certified beauty a shot is definitely on our list. One of the best descriptors we can offer is visualizing hot marshmallows dipped in peanut butter, and does that not sound just wonderful? When it comes to sandwiches, only a few were as satisfying as the roast beef sandwich. So, many sandwiches were originally created as a clever way to repurpose leftovers, and this one was no exception. Roast beef sandwiches often started with leftovers from Sunday dinner. The Sunday roast was a time-honored tradition, and any extra beef was used to make delicious sandwiches for lunch the next day. In 1900, the dish was described by the Washington Post as unattractive and as a tired ark in a gravy flood. However, it gained popularity in the coming years when Grandma decided to take matters into her own hands, and by 1931, some critics even went as far as to describe it as a true taste of South Dakota. The bread for Grandma's roast beef sandwich was often homemade, and boy did she know how to dress it up. Whether it was a dollop of horseradish sauce, a spread of mustard, or a smear of mayonnaise, Gram knew exactly what it needed, and if we got lucky, she even snuck in a slice of cheese. The deviled ham sandwich is a spicy minced ham spread that had some real glory days in the 1860s, but went down in popularity as taste palettes changed and sandwiches became more of a fast food-centric meal. This homemade, high-effort sandwich had its famed downfall. Barely seen or talked about today, the deviled ham sandwich was prepared using ingredients like egg yolks, citrusy lemon juice, generous sprinkles of black pepper, and mustard. The ham you use depends on you, and as long as it's properly cured, it shouldn't make much of a difference. One of the fancier ways to serve it was an open-faced sandwich topped with a poached egg. The modern version of the sandwich can be spun 100 different ways. Most tend to opt for additional spices, though. What would your take be on this vintage sandwich? So the next two dishes we have on the list are actually some classics right out of Africa and its many varied cuisines. First off, we have chicken and collard greens pilau, which is just the perfect dish to have if you're aching for something that involves a lot of rice in it. The steamed and boiled chicken mixed with the pilau as a base for the dish gives it an aroma that's pretty much unbeatable. Back in the middle of the 20th century, if you really wanted to experiment with some foreign cooking and tastes, then you would go into African American communities and try out the best of their soul food. You'd have to look around a little for the really nice restaurants, especially if you were in places like the southern parts of America, but nonetheless, people found a way. Pilau itself is also a dish that's extremely common in the subcontinent for many reasons. People use basmati rice for this, which is a little different from the rice you guys might be used to, but if you give it a shot, you might find that it has a more full flavor all around. Also, don't even get me started on how good this is for you. If you're a gym bro looking for a great way to add some tasty protein and carbs to your diet, then chicken and collard greens with some pilau is a pretty flawless place to start. Super sub. Avocado toast? That's not what life was like during the Dust Bowl. People were eating cactus fruit and spreading lard. Now you might be wondering, what on earth is a cactus fruit? Well, think of it as nature's candy. These spiny little fruits, also called cactus pears or prickly pears, were produced by cacti and turned into an important staple during the worst days of the Dust Bowl. These spiny wonders would be gathered, skinned, and the sweet and sour pulp could be eaten. Now here's where things get interesting. They didn't just eat cactus fruit by itself. No, sir. Farmers needed to add more substance to it, and that's where lard comes in. Lard, the rendered pig fat that many farm families kept in their pantry. So, they would beat the cactus fruit with a generous dollop of lard, and they could spread it on bread, crackers, or anything that was eatable at that time. It wasn't fancy, but it fed people. Well, yes, it might sound a little strange now, but cactus fruit contained vitamins and water, which was scarce. Well, it goes without saying that where there is a will, there is a way. And this combo is a perfect example of that. When sugar and milk were scarce, cornstarch pudding became a popular dessert. It's a simple mixture of cornstarch, sugar, and milk, cooked until thickened. This creamy pudding was made with just a few basic ingredients: milk, sugar, cornstarch, and a pinch of salt. It was a quick and easy dessert that could be flavored with vanilla, chocolate, or even fruit extracts, depending on what you had on hand. Cornstarch pudding was a favorite because it was cheap, easy to make, and could be customized to suit different tastes. It was a comforting treat that provided a little sweetness during tough times. So, if you're in the mood for a simple, nostalgic dessert, whip up a batch of cornstarch pudding. Who knows? It might just hit the right spot. Cottage cheese being used as a substitute for meat is another factor of cooking that you probably never thought was possible, but is actually well documented. Even the Department of Agriculture agrees that it is a pretty rocking substitute for meat as it contains a lot of protein. And when you need to get your macros in on a budget, you cannot be complaining about the source. Sure, everyone would love to fulfill their battle-action protagonist fantasies of chowing down trays and trays of meat, but we only need so many grams of protein in a day to make a bulk. Dry curd cottage cheese especially contains more protein per pound than beef or lamb, and only chicken and veal beat it at that game. It seems there is a lot of cooking know-how that can be picked up from Americans living in those times. People from the Depression era still had to deal with seasonal produce and shopping. Nowadays, you get canned, pre-frozen, ready-made, packaged versions of everything. You'll get mangoes out of summer and oranges in, like spring or something. It doesn't make any sense, though, and that's because those fruits aren't really the real deal. Buying seasonal produce isn't just cheap and easy, it's also extremely healthy for you. You get the most natural produce without any additives or preservatives and at a better price. Do you know how rare it is to have a good deal nowadays? We have had a pretty concerning lack of pies on the list so far, right? Let's fix that by going down memory lane where we can find potato and onion pies, a delicacy that took America by storm, especially in the Midwest. Dried potatoes, sliced onions sprinkled with salt, pepper, and garlic, and you had a pretty killer pie. If by some luck the average household back then had some cheese to spare as well, then some serious fine dining would take place. Parmesan cheese was something Grandma incorporated much later when it became readily available again, but the authentic gritty potato and onion pie of the early 30s was an experience in and of itself. Some dishes just exude an air of comfort and homeliness, like being back in your childhood neighborhood at 7 a.m. on a really sunny day. This was definitely one of those. What we cannot get are chicken salad and grape sandwiches. Seriously, what was the vision here and who signed off on it? Honestly, the most action this dish saw was when it was the weekend, and there were only leftovers and some odd assortment of fruits at home. Places like Rhode Island still had a fan base for the flavors this sandwich had, especially in early 1970s, and the highlight here really was the chicken salad. Not something you would have to enter a food coma, but definitely something you want if you are counting calories. Health-wise, this was probably the best sandwich you could get back then, when the alternatives were grease-loaded behemoths or experimental train wrecks. Most of the lovers of chicken salad and grape sandwiches dwindled a lot over the years, and now it is just a memory. The key to a good sandwich was in its simple ingredients, and Graham knew it better than anyone. That's why she whipped up the classic chicken salad sandwich anytime we craved some comfort food. Chicken salad has been a beloved dish in American homes since the mid-1800s. Grandma decided to make it into a hearty sandwich to make snack time better. Grandma's version of the chicken salad sandwich often included unique ingredients passed down through generations. Depending on where your grandma hails from, her chicken salad sandwich recipe might have a regional flair. In the South, you might find it spiced with a bit of mustard or pickle juice, while in New England, cranberries might be tossed in for a touch of tartness. Corned beef tongue with mustard in between fluffy bread slices. Okay, beef tongue might be way out of your palate, but don't disregard the corned beef tongue sandwich just yet. For something to fade from history, it's got to cement its spot there first, right? Can't do that if you don't bring something to the table. Perhaps this one will bring a lot more than you'd expect. It's traditionally prepared with carrots, garlic, red pepper, black pepper, salt, onions, mayo, and spice like bell pepper, paprika, and some garnishes like lime and parsley. So we already have the makings of a savory delight. You really want to keep a close eye on the beef tongue while it's in the pot, though. It can alter the flavor or dry it out fast. Though this sandwich has faded into the past now, the intricacy and delicacy through which it was created is a marvel to look back at. Maybe one day, this sandwich will come back at fancy restaurants, but for now, it remains a figment of the past. You hear the name rumaki and you might start thinking about some pretty exotic dishes, but it's actually more of a humble appetizer that picks a few flavors and does them really well. It was also made at Trader Vic's, a Polynesian-style restaurant right here in Uncle Sam's USA, which I'm sure you didn't see coming either. I wouldn't blame you for thinking it's exotic, since at tiki parties it was definitely considered that, and when tiki culture as a whole started erupting into the mainstream of American eating, it was still sought after, with just as much interest. The dish itself also makes use of some things that aren't familiar, and some that are like chicken livers, water chestnuts, and bacon. It was a really good hors d'oeuvre that boomed in popularity after the World War II era, though you'd be pretty stumped if you tried to go out and look for it today. Still, it's kind of sad we can't go out to parties and experience chestnuts and crispy bacon anymore, wouldn't you agree? Or is tiki cooking not really up your alley? If you believe that using every part of the animal is a modern concept, you are mistaken. Dust Bowl families were not sparing any part of the pig, including the snout. Pig snouts breaded might sound like something you dare a friend to eat, but during the Great Depression, it was a delicacy. When meat was a rare commodity, the snout was a cheap source of something meaty, chewy, and quite palatable. The snouts were washed, cooked until soft, and then breaded before being deep-fried to golden brown. The result? A crispy outside and a very tasty meat on the inside. Well, yes, the texture may have been somewhat unusual, but when you are hungry, you don't mind. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. To Dust Bowl families, pig snouts breaded were not just edibles, but a way to pay tribute to every pound of what little they had. No part was wasted, while such meals ensured that scarcity became resourcefulness. Nowadays, breaded pig snouts can be found only in some culinary forums, but they are a vivid example of how people tried to feed themselves when there were no chips, but snouts. Would I try it? To put it in perspective, if my grandma was to prepare it with a wink and a smile, I'd be willing to take a bite. Indeed, when you survive, you become brave and perhaps a little curious. But would you try it? Leave us the answer in the comments below. Okay, this next one sounds like some kind of alien food, but milcorno was a Depression-era kitchen miracle. It was a government-invented mixture of cornmeal and dried milk powder, designed to be a cheap and nutritious substitute for more expensive foods. A research team led by Flora Rose developed milcorno, milkoato, and milkweedo cereals in the early 1930s, and they were sold exclusively to the Federal Emergency Relief Administration for distribution to Americans impoverished by the Depression. It was claimed that by substituting milcorno for flour and cornmeal, a family of 5 could eat for less than $5 a week. The best part about milcorno was its versatility. You could use it as a base for porridge, bake it into cornbread, or even use it to thicken soups. And while it might not sound super exciting, milcorno dishes could actually be pretty tasty with the right seasonings and a bit of creativity. With the rise of delicious cereals, there's no room for it in our diets now, but hey, no one's going to judge you if you want to give it a try. A more simple breakfast to get people's day started was creamed peas on toast. Look, lots of homes could only use so much butter, and spices like cinnamon or other toppings very popular with toast nowadays were definitely out of the question. People still need a good kick to get their Monday in motion, and these peas were not only a wonderful source of protein, but the cream on the toast made for a filling breakfast too. There was a massive emphasis in World War II on dishes that prioritized nutrition while keeping you full, or as full as you could get. In America, every household was more than willing to compromise a bit on flavor, elegance, or presentation in exchange for more practical food that still tasted all right. Creamed peas on toast understood the assignment perfectly and fit the bill. So it was a lot easier to make one-pot meals than it was to make a starter, a main course, and something on the side for dessert. I don't mean easier as in it took less labor and effort. I mean it was a lot easier on your wallet. Why do you think casseroles were as popular as they got during the 50s and 60s? One-pot meals are a world of convenience, and you can make a meal that feeds the entire family for the whole day with minimal amounts of ingredients. Plus, if you're looking for good recipes to start with, then there's a treasure trove waiting for you in the past decades in our channel. So most oatmeal meatloaf recipes use the oats as a side piece to, like, 2 pounds of lean ground beef, but that was obviously not what people were working with back then. Instead, the loaf was made entirely of layers of oatmeal, with sausages and bacon stuffed into it to give that meaty profile. Some dried onions and garlic meant that there was good enough reason to get the fine plates out, and there was always enough to go around too. Plus, grandmas really ran with the recipe right after the Depression ended and things started going back to normal. They would add things like tomato sauces and never spare the eggs or the flour. Probably why kids would love it so much since they went all out with it. But after going through a patch where this was a luxury, you cannot blame them for wanting to go the extra mile either. Bologna and cheese sandwiches were sandwiches that you could pull out of the refrigerator and have nobody raising any eyebrows, only happy smiles and eager stomachs. Bologna spreads were not too popular in America until the 70s when they first properly started picking up some steam. People got on the bandwagon once bologna and pepperoni pizzas started becoming regular takeout options in states like New York and Chicago. If it works on a pizza, by the laws of nature, it must be tried on a sandwich or burger too. We are not sure who came up with that rule of thumb, but they were really onto something, because this made for a great sandwich that was a meal people ate when all there was for dinner was sleep. While a lot of those cheeses and spreads got discontinued now, we would love to try an authentic sandwich from the 70s because it sounds right up our alley. Here's another French classic that's a bit different from the rest of the sandwiches on the list. The Monte Cristo sandwich is a variation of the French croque monsieur. In simpler terms, it's a classic grilled ham and cheese sandwich. To make a great Monte Cristo, the sandwich had to be fried just right, and unlike most, this was dipped in egg batter and fried. The name was inspired by Alexandre Dumas' novel The Count of Monte Cristo, and this gave it a luxurious touch. If you have French ancestors, you likely have fond memories of eating this at family brunches. The head cheese sandwich in basic terms is just slices of head cheese, which is a cold cut made from meat from the head of a calf or pig on bread. If you'd rather not the head, then you can also use trimmings, and in terms of assembly, this resembles more of a charcuterie board than anything else. It's packed to the brim with vegetables, spices, and other aromatics. Though still, the entire head of an animal can be a bit of a daunting task for any chef. Once you've got your bread toasted and your spread spreaded, add your spices and vegetables and the hog's head cheese and assemble accordingly. If you actually manage to pull it off, this is definitely a vintage worth getting your hands dirtier than usual. If you take a look at the history of Brooklyn, you'll find something that was really popular, which was ham cheese balls. These were the perfect bite-sized appetizer to gorge yourself on while you waited for the main meal. A lot of grandmas would have handwritten notes tacked onto family cookbooks about how to make the perfect ham ball, what the ratio of meat was, how much cheese you needed to put in, how much you needed to roll them and shape them before they were perfect. It was one of those snacks that just did well everywhere. In Iowa, too, it was one of the most easily available snacks you could find anywhere in the state. All in all, it's one of the best things to ever come out of the Midwest. And no Christmas is honestly complete until you down a platter of ham cheese balls and make the tray look spotless. Have you ever grown up around these? Do you still remember the taste? It's not something you would find so often nowadays, but the days when it was really everywhere were some good ones. You may think of weed as something you don't want in your garden, but during the Dust Bowl, it was the only thing that could keep people alive. Weed and root stew was another dish that families who were surviving on the edge of starvation could afford, which meant even the most unappetizing plants could save lives. This stew was full of wild greens, dandelions, lamb's quarters, purslane, things you dig up in the garden with your fingers. The stew was not gourmet, but it was filling. The weeds and roots were boiled in water with whatever scrap of meat or bone one could come across. A piece of chicken that had been used the previous day or some beef if one were lucky. The trick was to make it filling, and wild greens can do that. The taste was not gourmet, but hearty. It would not be a restaurant of the stars, but a restaurant of the gut. The roots were sometimes starchy, which was good enough for making a soup. Although calling it weed might not exactly make your mouth water today, wild plants were a great source of vitamins and minerals. Much more than that yellowing lettuce in the back of the fridge. Would I eat it? Frankly, if I were in the Dust Bowl, I'd take that weed stew and turn it into my gourmet dish. It is evidence that when it comes to seasoning, desperation is the best thing. All right, let's talk about a real comfort food of the Depression. Bean in tomato stew. Beans were a go-to ingredient during the Depression days because of how nutritious, affordable, and versatile they are. It's basically just what it sounds like. Beans cooked in a tomato-based broth. But you could also throw in potatoes, carrots, and maybe even a little bit of rice for extra substance. The beans provided a good source of protein and fiber, while the tomato sauce added a burst of flavor. This stew could be enjoyed on its own or served over rice, bread, or even mashed potatoes if you were lucky enough to have them. Originally, Native Americans sweetened baked beans with maple syrup, but then someone decided to turn this protein into a stew, and hey, we're not complaining. It was a filling meal back in the day, and it's still cooked in many households around America where the budget is a bit too tight. I know this dish might sound plain, but believe me, when your belly is rumbling and your pantry is bare, this stew can be a lifesaver. If people can make an entire fake fish fillet and still be pretty satisfied with it, then other meaty wonders like liver definitely are not too far off the horizon, and chopped liver substitute would eventually prove that right. Something that became incredibly popular in the war-torn landscape of America because all it took was some onions, green lentils, walnuts, and salt and pepper. You had to make a paste out of it to get the texture of chopped liver down, and in terms of taste, this was a completely new experience, yet a significantly cheaper and easier one. It was much easier to get ingredients like these than good quality liver back then, and a lot of citizens stuck with this recipe even after the dust settled because they liked how healthy of an alternative it was. Also, people would use leftover coffee grounds to naturally cleanse their home of any kind of odor. See, the thing you probably don't know about coffee grounds is that they actually work extremely well as a natural deodorizer. While the appeal of having a mix of every scent known to man being available to you at the tap of a phone is pretty neat, it doesn't really help you get your money up. If that's what you're interested in, maybe you could buy the cheap can of air freshener, keep those windows open, and reuse your coffee grounds before you throw them around. By the way, they make great compost too. Comfort food in the 1940s could not be discussed without somebody bringing up American slumgullion. This was really hot in the Midwest and the South, mostly by its other name of goulash. The dish has been in recipes and cookbooks since at least 1913, and it would include ground beef simmered in a tomato sauce. It was a dish for nights that you really wanted to make matter, and it was also a great way to keep the nutrition and protein intake up. Think of it as like a kind of casserole, and if you have heard of it before, you should know the 1930s versions were a bit different. These ones involved no pasta or macaroni or cheese. Those would become staples of the dish much later on, and we have grandparents to thank for that too. Egg salad and bacon sandwiches had a really strong presence in the southern parts of the USA. If you remember the egg and olive sandwiches earlier on from the list, then that and this would often be mixed together. People would love putting crispy bits of bacon mixed in with egg salad that replaced the boiled eggs and sprinkling olives with many sauces. Flavorful and packed with enough to entertain you until the last bite, egg salad and bacon sandwiches worked as a breakfast or an afternoon meal or even dinner in some parts. Neighborhoods in Texas particularly loved spicing their egg salads up by making a nifty sandwich out of it, and even if the trend is now gone, we still think there is potential in the idea. Speaking of meaty sandwiches, the Turkey Club sandwich was another fan favorite. Now, this one was known for its 3 layers of bread, which made it stand out from the rest of the sandwiches on the table. The club sandwich has its roots in American culinary history, with some sources suggesting it was first served in private social clubs in the late 19th century. By the time Grandma was making them, it had already become the talk of the town. Graham often made this one the day after Thanksgiving when there was no shortage of leftover roast turkey in the refrigerator. The key ingredient in this sandwich was crispy bacon, which Graham added to make it kid-friendly and 10 times more delicious. Grandma's Turkey Club sandwich was often cut in quarters or halves, which made it easier to eat, and this was the first time sandwiches were cut diagonally. And remember the toothpicks Graham used to hold it together with colorful cellophane frills? Brings back memories, doesn't it? The egg and sardine sandwich was an odd mix of hard-boiled eggs mashed with sardines. The sandwich was most popular from 1923 to the 1950s, when sardine alternatives like turkey, bacon, and bologna were not popular. Sardines were affordable, and so the sardine and egg sandwich was a go-to choice for many. The recipe was simple, and easily accessible ingredients were used to create this sandwich. All you needed was 2 nice fluffy eggs whisked until thick if you don't prefer them hard-boiled, and sardines over toasted bread. People would often spice it up with their own choice of vegetables and sauces. Some would even chop up sardines, season them with spices, and dice the eggs with melted cheese to create a combo that sounds a bit outrageous but might be better than you'd think. The sandwich disappeared when the alternatives to sardines became affordable to the common man. Speaking of those times, another really good source of protein was catfish, and one of the best ways to have it was fried catfish with hush puppies. This is again something that'll take us right to the heart of Southern cooking if we eat it. Along those rural places near rivers, lakes, ponds, and other bodies of water where you could find fresh catfish in abundance. Hush puppies were something made with fried cornmeal batter and were a popular dish to give to soldiers during the Civil War, so all in all, this dish was really light money-wise. Some basic Cajun spices or a Southern spice blend would make it even better into a real full-fledged meal that you could eat in comfort with the family. While it's been a big part of Southern cooking ever since the 19th century, it arguably had its biggest glory days in the 20th one as part of Southern soul food. There was a time in the 30s to 40s where soul food started to get into more and more menus across several places in the South, which wasn't always the case. Thank God it did, though, because steamed catfish definitely doesn't hit the spot quite like fried ones do with some golden brown hush puppies. If you believe that eating insects is a modern, sustainable practice, you are wrong. In the Dust Bowl, crispy fried grasshoppers were not a joke. They were a staple food. During the poor harvests, and when meat was hard to come by, farmers looked to the hordes of grasshoppers feeding on the crops. Talk about revenge dining. Hunting grasshoppers was a family event, and when you had gathered enough grasshoppers in a bucket, then the cooking process started. They were washed, marinated, and then fried to a crisp golden brown. The result? A crunchy snack that contained protein and was not too shabby if one didn't consider what they were consuming. Grasshoppers are in fact a form of superfood as they contain high protein, iron, and good fats. The Dust Bowl families were not consciously trying to innovate, but they were able to feed themselves in a way that many others could not. Also, if you fry anything, it automatically becomes at least 50% tastier, doesn't it? Nowadays, insects are being considered as a source of food, but in the past, crispy grasshoppers were a means of feeding oneself. So, peanut butter stuffed baked onion might sound strange, but trust me, it's worth a try. We're taking a whole onion, hollowing it out, and stuffing it with peanut butter. Then, we're going to bake it until the onion is caramelized and sweet. It sounds like an odd pairing, but the salty, creamy peanut butter and the sweet onion actually complement each other really well. This dish was a unique way to combine protein and vegetables. It might not be everyone's cup of tea, but it was a clever way to make a filling meal out of inexpensive ingredients. Plus, onions were a staple in many households because they were stored well and added flavor to almost any dish. It was one of the more outlandish food recipes to come out of the Great Depression, and food historians Andrew Coe and Jane Ziegelman, authors of A Square Meal, are certainly no fans. So am I. Shortages were extremely common right up to before Pearl Harbor and especially after it. This is what led to things like Woolton pie dominating the mainstream, even though the dish would probably not see the light of day in normal circumstances. It is just that things like pies, loaves, pizzas, etc. had all become unattainable desires that were out of the public's grasp, more or less. Something had to be done, though, because not only did people need to be fed, they needed to be reminded of why eating good food is one of life's best joys. A hot, nice meal can do so much for a person's soul in times of conflict and uncertainty. And Woolton pies, despite being made entirely out of vegetables, not only gave your body the health boost it needed, but they felt comforting to share with your family. In the times that were the Depression, there was a dire lack of oil and cooking fat. This meant that the already really tough cuts of meat that people were using, like the shoulders or the back, were even harder to chew and keep down every other day since there was no fat to help them with flavor. On the other hand, people would try to get around this issue by using as much leftover bacon grease as they could. Maybe that's a bit icky for you, but hey, it does help. Plus, they were a lot healthier than we were, so maybe the icks are coming from inside the house. Egg drop soup sounds a little fancier than it is, but have you never had a simple dish that knocked the socks off of you? Just a 2 or 3 ingredient show that really hit home, ticked every box, and left you with a smile? Egg drop soup was a lot like that. It was just diced potatoes and onions, which might get you thinking of the pie we just went over, but this is more like a broth. If chicken broth was there, then of course that was the foundation, but water worked too. Once the potatoes started cooking, you would drizzle some scrambled eggs before adding whole ones. It might look lumpy and score a little less for presentation, but it deserves a solid A+ just for the taste alone, especially if you would pair it with some leftover bread. Spam and pineapple sandwiches, on the other hand, are a Hawaiian invention that makes some stomachs less audible. On the other hand, if you are anything like us, then maybe the blend of spices, fruits, and canned pork and ham will create a unique flavor trip for you. Spam and pineapple sandwiches in the state of Hawaii would usually be accompanied with things like mango slices or mango chutney, peppers, chili pastes, and fresh coleslaw. All of this really elevated the dish and gave it a strong identity to pull from when it was making impressions on people for the first time in the 70s, and most were good ones. While pineapples are eternally hated in America, this is one mix of different foods that a lot of citizens could get in line for, and that is why we are sad to see this one gone. The meatball sub is the kind of sandwich that's meant to be messy. The meatball sub has its origins in Italian-American cuisine. While meatballs are a traditional Italian dish, the meatball sub became popular in the U.S. as Italian immigrants put an American twist to it. We're talking juicy meatballs, marinara sauce topped with melted cheese on a long, crusty roll. Yeah, it doesn't really get more American than this. What makes or breaks this sandwich is the sauce, and Grandma knew it all too well. The sauce had to be the right balance of sweetness and acidity, and of course, the bread had to be sturdy enough to hold everything together. It's the kind of sandwich that you need 2 hands to eat, and maybe a napkin or 2, but it's worth every bite. It's a classic comfort food that never goes out of style. Sliced bananas with mayo on white bread. This banana and mayonnaise sandwich is a bit of a wild card for sure, but keep an open mind because the South definitely does, which is where this interesting creation finds its origins. Typically, a lot of comfort food comes out of the southern USA. As you may have guessed, preparing this is as simple as taking candy from a toddler. Now I know what you're thinking. Bananas and mayo sounds worse than water and oil. However, there's a reason it comes into comfort food. All you need is a sliced banana, 2 slices of fresh bread, and a good spread of mayo. Maybe not the best you'll ever have, but what's the downside? Give this forgotten experiment a try and see if it's up your alley. Bacon. Crackers, I mean, sure, they're pretty good even as a typical easygoing breakfast, but what do we really do here? You eat something enough times, you tend to get used to it and get bored. How do you get around that? Well, since the topic is retro dishes, we used to hear a lot about bacon bow tie crackers back in the day. It was something you could find for breakfast or a cocktail appetizer, which is some serious versatility. The crackers were extra crispy since they were wrapped inside bacon and then baked until the bacon itself was pretty crispy. It was the perfect combo, and all they needed was each other to realize that. It was smoky but sweet. It was also savory, but buttery smooth and not dry at all. Dishes that are such neat little combinations like these are often hiding right under your nose, and if we didn't have the imagination of so many home chefs who found these and got them into the public sphere, then we'd be a lot more tasteless as a country. What's for dinner? Oh, just a small something that came in from the backyard. Yes, the tumbleweed casserole was a real dish during the Dust Bowl, which just goes to show you that when the going gets tough, the tough make casseroles out of tumbleweeds. Tumbleweeds, those rolling shrubs of the Wild West screen, are actually technically, or at least partially, edible. Not fancy for the tongue, but we are hungry to the bone. Let's give it a try, edible. The process began with the boiling of the tumbleweed leaves to reduce their coarse feel and also to reduce the bitterness of the leaves. Then they'd get layered with whatever ingredients were available, maybe some scraps of meat, potatoes, or canned goods if you were lucky. The result? A surprisingly substantial, earthy flavored casserole that was as much about sustenance as it was about taste. Tumbleweed is very fibrous and even has a few vitamins in it, so it wasn't the worst thing to eat when fresh greens were scarce. Moreover, tumbleweeds were free and easy to come by, nature's grocery store if you will. Though you'll never see it on the dinner table. Tumbleweed casserole represents Dust Bowl endurance. Would I eat it? Well, I'd need a serious pep talk and a lot of seasoning. But hey, if the tumbleweed can take the hot winds, then it should not be a problem on my plate. Who says you need apples to make an apple pie? Not the Depression era, folks, that's for sure. This mock apple pie was a genius hack that used Ritz crackers as the crust and a sweet, sticky filling made from sugar, cinnamon, and water. It was a budget-friendly dessert that satisfied the sweet tooth without the need for expensive or hard-to-find ingredients. Plus, it was a great way to use up those stale crackers lurking in the back of your pantry. The Ritz mock apple pie became a Depression-era favorite, despite the fact that it was a pastry imposter. How did it work? The aromatic mixture of sugar, cinnamon, butter, lemon juice, and crackers combined to convince the taster's senses that the pie actually tasted of apples. Mock apple pie actually dates to the mid-1800s. During the wintertime, when apples were scarce and dried apple stores were used up, inventive home cooks would instead use soda crackers or stale bread. The more modern Ritz cracker version came about in the 1930s. By now, you must be getting an idea of how many basic things really slipped out of people's hands, including once common delicacies like sour cream. People found a good replacement that met them halfway for more or less the same experience in potato flour sour cream, which used potato flour and sugar to copy the essential taste of sour cream. It came pretty close too, if we do say so ourselves. You do not have to hear it from us though, just search this classic World War II recipe up and you will find many references dating back to this era about the recipe. This would later go on to inspire dishes like sour cream potato rolls in more stable times, and folks still kept the recipe in rotation. During the Depression, it was extremely common for lots of households to be out of detergent. When they would do their laundry, they would instead use vinegar to get rid of any unpleasant odors and soften their clothes. It would help in saving bills because vinegar was a lot easier to get and a lot more affordable than detergent was. Plus, it would last just as long, if not longer. You wouldn't need to take an extreme amount of the stuff anyway, and hey, if it works for cat pee, I think it'll do wonders for a bunch of sweat stains on your shirt. So, speaking of cakes, hot water cornbread was also a not-so-close but close enough alternative to your regular layered delights. It was made in a pan, and the batter was shaped into cakes before being fried in hot fat to add that iconic crisp that nothing else had. Seriously, this thing gave fried chicken burgers a run for their money in retrospect. Then some salt and boiling water was all you needed. It had a perfectly crisp exterior that crumbled in your mouth perfectly, while the inside was tender, warm, and very reminiscent of Grandma's cooking. Probably why it caught on as much as it did, since most of these ingredients managed to get the long end of the stick with inflation. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches might be a little ironic considering what we just talked about, but one thing they most definitely are is downright delicious. We know you are imagining it as you watch the video, and that is okay because, honestly, same. Crispy fried strips of bacon lathered in thick peanut butter are enough to get anyone's mind going. In the 70s, peanut butter and bacon sandwiches were the standard American breakfast, and they may have even started the stereotype of the US being a nation of bacon heads. When you get to the plates of every household in 50 states, you can claim a piece of culture for yourself too. Peanut butter and bacon sandwiches remain in the Food Hall of Fame, and there was nothing like a fresh sandwich off the pan in the 70s. So, this next sandwich is also typically made from only 3 ingredients, but it's still one of Grandma's most iconic creations. I'm talking about the infamous BLT sandwich. The name is an abbreviation for the ingredients: bacon, lettuce, and tomato. This sandwich was a summertime favorite, especially when tomatoes were at their ripest in Graham's garden. The BLT's roots can be traced back to tea sandwiches served in the late 19th century, but it wasn't until World War II when it gained popularity. During this time, supermarkets made bacon, lettuce, and tomatoes more widely available all year round, and Grandma made sure to use them up in the kitchen. A classic BLT is often made with mayonnaise, but some purists argue that the sandwich should be spread with butter instead. Well, it's still up for debate, so make sure to let us know your take on it in the comments. Nut butter. The mock ham salad sandwich was a popular sandwich that people chose to make when they had every ingredient but ham in their fridge. The sandwich was a perfect mix for when people had leftovers in the past. Using some mayo, boiled eggs, and pickles with the right seasoning was paired up with ingredients they scavenged from the back of their freezer to create a mock ham salad sandwich. The recipe was as simple as that, which made it a go-to sandwich for people looking to empty their fridge. As time passed, the need for having mock ham instead of real ham lowered. With less and less people creating this sandwich, like all the sandwiches on this list, it faded into history. But the simple nature of the recipe allowed for the method of making this sandwich to be preserved for future sandwich enthusiasts to see. Hoppin' John is a dish that has some pretty rich heritage. I'm talking about African, Caribbean, and Native American roots that all boil together in the melting pot known as the South, where it first started becoming really trendy. However, the origins of the dish are actually a bit darker than just a happy coincidence that somehow got into everyone's table. Though the people who were eating it happily wouldn't know, it was first created and brought over by enslaved Africans in the American South. It made use of African rice and pork, and yes, the best part of the dish were the black-eyed peas even in those times. Now, as far as the name Hoppin' John is considered, nobody really ever knew where it first came from, or if there was a John who made this dish and brought it into everyone's lives, but the first time this name was mentioned was in the 1840s in a print. If you were down in the South and African American communities during New Year, then you would especially see a lot of Hoppin' Johns everywhere. The aroma of those peas and the smoked pork wouldn't miss anyone's nose, as the scent carried for miles and miles away. It was eaten specifically on New Year's because it was a common belief that eating Hoppin' Johns would bring good luck to people if they ate it to start the year. If you went into any new year with such a good plate of food, I'd say your luck was already pretty good. So maybe it does work? If you always believed that only the drippings can be used to make gravy, then you are wrong. Blood gravy was a Dust Bowl staple that created a meal from the most unappetizing of ingredients, animal blood. Sound intense? It was. But back then, farmers couldn't afford to waste a single drop, literally. Blood gravy was produced by drawing fresh blood from animals, particularly pigs or cows, and then mixing it with flour, milk, and spices to make it into a thick paste that was served as a relish. Served over biscuits or potatoes, it was rather tasty and rich in nutrients, which came as a complete shock. During a period when people suffered from a lack of iron, blood gravy was, in fact, a sort of multivitamin. This dish was both a product of ingenuity and the expenditure of a considerable amount of effort. Getting the blood was not easy, but the meal was filling. For today's food lovers, it may be hard to swallow, but blood-based recipes are not something new to the culinary world since there is blood pudding from Sweden and dinuguan from the Philippines. Would you try it? Seriously, I can take it if it's presented on a fluffy biscuit, and if it's well seasoned, I might be willing to try it. Dust Bowl cooks were masters of turning nothing into something, and blood gravy is a perfect example of that adage. Who would have thought that weeds could be a meal? Well, during the Great Depression, dandelion greens were a common sight on dinner tables. This vitamin-packed ingredient is foraged by Italian immigrant women in New York City. These bitter, leafy greens were rich in vitamins and minerals, making them a nutritious addition to any meal. People would often sauté the greens with a bit of bacon or lard, garlic, and onions to balance out the bitterness. They could also be used in salads or added to soups and stews. So, if you ever spot dandelions growing in your yard, remember that they're not just weeds. They're a delicious and nutritious green that can be enjoyed in a variety of ways. Just make sure they haven't been treated with any chemicals before you eat them. People that grew up during World War II will know that mixing sawdust with bread to fortify it so that your supply would last twice as long is not quite the urban myth it is made out to be today, but rather a sad fact of a dark time that people would prefer to leave in the past. This was something born purely out of necessity and a lack of basic necessities like flour. Since it was becoming so scarce across America, People's supplies of bread were running out fast and often. Bread was the only thing families had to eat too. With even that comfort gone, people took to mixing sawdust, which you could even taste in the bread. In some cases, it made the bread go bad faster, such as people when used too much of it. But in most other appliances of this technique, it worked as a filler when nothing else could be used as one. This would also set up a trend of consuming fiber in the 70s, even though most companies used cellulose fiber that was made from sawdust. So it actually does have quite a history in America. People back in the Depression had one thing over us by miles. They had a stronger communal spirit. Sharing equipment wasn't strange at all for them, and in fact, was literally a vital part of their daily routine and life. Sharing expensive equipment such as lawnmowers, vacuums, straighteners, dryers, all of that was really common. It meant that people could save on their electricity bill and also build up some goodwill. You borrow something from your neighbor, then the next time they need something, you lend it to them. The end result? Both of you get your money up. You know one thing? Not forget all the times a well-made bacon and onion sandwich made the difference between an exhausting, bland day and one with a warm and welcome surprise. Most people would be real cautious with their bacon, as the days of simply frying up a few strips and eating them as is were gone. You had to make each cut of meat count, especially bacon. While it was still attainable on average, its new prices were not doing anybody any favors. So people would dice up some onions, saute them until they were that perfect golden brown, and make the bread themselves. Sometimes out of stuff like sawdust when dough would not be available, and there you had it. A perfectly vitalizing sandwich ready to put the spirit back into your tired body. Grandmas had this perfected down to a science, as they seemed to have developed a natural intuition for how much bacon, salt, and onions a good sandwich needed. Equally offensive to most conservative taste palates were pineapple and cheese sandwiches. As of 2024, it is a well-established fact that the West and pineapples have had a very troubled relationship. Pineapples try their best for America, and America acts like an alcoholic husband that cannot notice his wife even on their anniversary. Back in the 70s, this was still a new culinary ground people were treading, just like ham and banana sandwiches. What they found was that it did not have the potential to go very mainstream, but it could grow itself a strong, loyal, and niche following. Most fans of this sandwich were in Hawaii, but in surrounding states, the trend took off moderately successfully. People loved the overly sweet and oddly comforting sensation of the sandwich, and we can see why. Pineapple and cheese sandwiches sound oddly delicious if you really think about it. While we're talking about canned goods of the past, tuna salad sandwich was another one of Graham's specialties. So, canned tuna became all the rage during World War I, and it was the most common item on the food aisle. Grandma decided to twist it up and make it into a delicious sandwich that shaped all our childhoods. This one was a staple at picnics or simple lunches at the grandparents' house. The star of this sandwich was mayonnaise. Yeah, there was no tuna sandwich without this key ingredient. It bonded the tuna salad together and gave it its unique taste. Tuna salad sandwiches were the top choice for lunch because they were easy to prepare and didn't require any cooking. Grandma could whip up a batch in minutes, and let's be honest, we ate them just as quickly. The pimiento cheese sandwich is a southern classic made with a spread of grated cheese, mayonnaise, and pimientos, typically served on white bread. This sandwich was once a staple at luncheons and picnics, but has become less common in recent times. The peak its popularity was definitely during the 20th century, mostly as a homemade snack. The conventional prep would be pimiento peppers and cheese, soft or grilled, usually cream, spread across 2 loaves of bread. It declined as a go-to snack after WW II, but the South remembers favorably the delicious pimiento sandwiches their grandmothers would whip up. Does it get any nostalgia going for you? This sandwich definitely rings some bells in the minds of Southerners, though it's hard to find places offering to create this now-forgotten sandwich. Green tomato pie is something that'll have you running back for seconds. First off, you gotta hand it to whoever made this dish for their ingenuity. It's not every day you get a banger of a dish that actually is centered around making the green tomato shine out of everything else, but Southern home cooking will do that for you. Charlotte's green tomato pie in particular makes use of some typical southern spices like cinnamon and nutmeg and unripened green tomatoes, and has you making a pie that'll rival even the best apple ones you could find at bakeries. Green tomatoes have an especially great harvest during the fall, so that's when this dish would see the most mileage. You would find houses all over the South constantly making green tomato pies, and this specific pie is an example of how you don't need anything fancy to create something that can get everyone at the table. You know what's even funnier? This dish is one of the best things to come out of mock cooking because it was made to imitate mock apple pie and mincemeat pies. An imitation of an imitation ends up giving us something that was a big part of Southern culture. Who would have thought? If life hands you corn cobs, make jelly. This creation of the Dust Bowl is the best example of use it or else it will be used on you. Indeed, in the old days when food was hard to come by, one could not even discard corn cobs. Yes, the very same cobs that you discarded in the bin today were used to make a sweet golden jelly that was related to honey in taste. The process was simple. Take the cobs, boil them to get the corn starchy goodness, add sugar and pectin, and you have corn cob jelly. It was inexpensive, convenient, and could be slathered on the constant companion of the Depression: bread. The taste? Light and sweet with a very subtle corn taste. And let's face it, when you are living off of crumbs, any type of jelly is a treat. Corn cob jelly may not sound like a dish that could be eaten today, but during that period, it was the best invention to solve a real issue. Everyone wanted to get as much use out of every kernel of corn as was humanly possible, figuratively and literally. Now it is a recipe that one might find in a rustic fare or a book of curious recipes, but in the past, it was a true example of people's creativity. At the very least, corn cob jelly makes us remember that life is a little sweeter when it's as corny as it is sweet. Up next, we have a dish that was all about making the most out of simple ingredients: spaghetti, boiled carrots, and white sauce casserole. It can be argued that Eleanor Roosevelt did the best she could during the Great Depression. The First Lady promoted dishes to encourage savvy homemakers, such as a casserole made from spaghetti, boiled carrots, and a simple white sauce of milk, flour, salt, and butter. The spaghetti had to be cooked for 25 minutes. The idea was to get the noodles mushy so they paired nicely with the boiled carrots and a penny's worth of creamy sauce. The result? A vehicle for nutrition and nutrients. Families loved this dish because it was versatile and could easily be modified based on what was available. It was a great way to fill up hungry bellies without breaking the bank. It still makes a pretty delicious meal for potlucks, so if you want to impress everyone with something easy to whip up, the spaghetti, boiled carrots, and white sauce casserole will do. It's actually a wonderful idea to share your subscriptions. Not everyone needs their own personal Netflix plan or Spotify subscription, especially now that we don't even have to pay for just Netflix. You have your Hulu, your Amazon Prime, your Disney Plus, HBO Max, and God knows what else. It feels like everything needs a subscription, and honestly, I'd take it a step further and say just start torrenting. But this is about what people from the 1930s would do, and they definitely slash those unnecessary subscriptions. Let's start our list off with some potato pancakes, an incredibly famous go-to recipe for grandmas across the nation today. Do you know how and why they ended up nailing the recipe for a fine potato pancake so perfectly, though? Potatoes were one of the most easily available vegetables both when buying with cash or bartering, plus lots of people started growing their own produce. Potatoes were a crop they went for regularly, because the flour and butter needed for a real pancake was not an option for many people. So, potato pancakes became the common breakfast of the century for a good decade or two, and it honestly held its ground pretty well. Made out of grated potatoes and simple seasonings, this felt just as good as a legitimate pancake. Another creative idea that worked very well in the kitchen were olive nut sandwiches. Folks started making their own spreads in the 70s in what was a wave of home cooking-oriented ideas that took America by the throat back then. All the rage was to be found in ideas that worked best at family tables, and olive nut sandwiches were a notable one from that era. black pepper, mayo, and cream cheese blended with various kinds of nuts to make a very crunchy and earthy spread that made 2 slices of white bread look like gold. Olive nut sandwiches honestly took every ingredient that was used in them to another level. Not one participant in this dish was better on its own, and that is what references from the early to the late 70s say all around the States. Definitely a better and much more imaginative way of getting your protein intake that we want back in today's menu. New Orleans contributes to the sandwich table as well, and it's got a classic, the muffaletta. This one originated in New Orleans, Louisiana, when Italian cuisine was on the rise. The sandwich is named after the round, Sicilian-style bread it's traditionally made with, known as muffuletta bread. It's typically a large sandwich, so every time Grandma made one, it was a whole feast. Plus, let's not forget the olive salad it was paired with. Talk about Italian cuisine at its finest. If you ever want to try the OG muffaletta, Central Grocery and Deli in New Orleans is credited for its creation. Yeah, it remains a must-visit spot for this iconic sandwich. A rather repulsive combo for some and appealing taste for others. The anchovy paste sandwich is a savory spread made from anchovy paste. This is less of a sandwich and more of a versatile condiment, but it does work extremely well on sandwiches, especially because the bread balances out the anchovy's taste. Historically, anchovy paste has always been used to give flavor and some pros to your health, but in the USA, it picked steam as a spread for sandwiches. You can spice this up with fried eggplants, tomatoes, chopped chicken chunks, a salad dressing, or anything you can imagine. This is one of those sandwiches where every time you try it, you can experiment. Speedies are also something you would find at gatherings for family or just friends, mostly because no party is complete without a good platter of meat skewers going around a few drinks. So, mostly people would enjoy these most when the meat was lamb, but some areas like California would use chicken or beef too. It was really the grilling where the magic happened. These plates of Speedies set the mood in a party alight. It was a taste that, when they experienced it, people at a party knew that they were in for a really good time. The kind of dish that gets a crowd excited and hungry. There were even Speedafests in Binghamton and all around New York in general. It was a part of the local culture that no big celebration was really complete without. The reason it got popular wasn't just because of a regional preference in New York, though. The dish was bold, tangy, and citrusy, and it could double as an amazing sandwich too. You would find these in street stalls throughout New York, as well as at homes, but nowadays the dish has faded away into irrelevance. When life hands you a cow but almost nothing else, you cook the cow's brains. Fried cow brains, or calf's brains, if you want to sound a bit more gourmet, was a Dust Bowl specialty not because people wanted to eat it, but because they had to. They were not fastidious in the past. When you had to fight for your life, you ate everything that was on the animal. Now I know that fried cow brains may sound like something that shouldn't even be considered food, let alone something that might be considered delicious. For this dish, brains were washed in water or milk, dredged in flour, and fried until brown and crispy. Consider them as the first-generation chicken nuggets, if chicken nuggets had a soft core and came with a helping of angst. The flavor? It was mild, almost buttery, and that was the reason why nobody fled from the dish when somebody served it. Cow brains fried were dense in nutrients, especially protein, and thus a good meal during famine. While nowadays people might shudder at the thought of consuming brains, in the past, it was simply Tuesday's supper. And hey, if you put some gravy on top, it might just seem like you're eating gourmet food. Yes, you heard it here first. Liver loaf might not sound appetizing, but it was a popular way to use up inexpensive liver during the Depression. It is a dish that might not be for everyone, but was an important source of nutrition during the tough days. The liver was one of the more affordable cuts of meat, and it was packed with essential nutrients. It's basically a meatloaf made with liver, mixed with breadcrumbs, onions, and spices. We'll add some carrots and celery for extra flavor and texture. It was often eaten as a main course, providing much-needed protein and iron. Food historians say that loaves were very popular during the Great Depression, because they were made from an ingredient and a cheap thing that stretches the ingredient out. Another big thing that people would always do? Repurposing furniture. Seriously, there was nothing like that. You could give old furniture an entirely new vibe with just a bit of paint here and there, some polish, a good dusting, and some fabric. People during the Depression went into their creative hobbies as much as they could, like sewing, crocheting, woodwork, carpentry, and stuff like that. It meant that they learned their way around the rusty and dusty furniture that they were so used to seeing in their homes and knew how to put some life back into it. Instead of going to IKEA and wasting yet another quarter of your paycheck on goods you don't need, you could just do this. Despite the prices of white sugar dropping as a whole after the First World War, leading molasses to decline in popularity, they made a strong comeback as the engine fueled a great batch of molasses cookies. People also started abandoning white sugar during the Second World War, and it caused them to look for alternatives for their yearly Christmas baking sessions, and the government was already pushing on molasses for widespread public use pretty hard. Eventually, people saw the value, and the ones that did not have to because it was so much cheaper to get molasses than any other ingredient. That, along with some sorghum syrup, meant that people could still enjoy a fresh batch of hot cookies and warm milk to welcome the winter. It might not seem like much, but maintaining tiny traditions like that meant a lot to people and kept their spirits going as the days got harder and costlier. Hot dog sandwiches are perhaps one track off of the 70s greatest hits album that we most want to see live with front row seats. In an era where they faced incredible competition since hot dogs were already dominating street food, these ruled. You had everything that was in your typical hot dog, including the relish and the mustard mixed with sliced dogs. And honestly, this led to a lot more creativity. People only have so much space to work with in a typical hot dog. A sandwich, on the flip side, is a much better culinary canvas. Chefs could specialize with fried onions or different sauces, mixing and matching to their heart's content. No surprise that this got so popular back then, but it unfortunately could not last the long haul despite how much we desperately wish for them to pop back up. Deli classics have always been Graham's specialty, and the corned beef sandwich was no exception. This one started out as a nod to the traditions of Eastern European cuisine and became popular in the United States in the early 20th century. In case you're wondering about the name, corned beef comes from the curing process. Corned refers to the large grains of salt that are used to preserve the meat. This was a pretty simple beef sandwich with a hint of mustard, but its taste really spoke for itself. And it even made its way into pop culture by being frequently featured in TV shows, movies, etc. For example, in the film The Godfather, there's a memorable scene where a character is shown eating a corned beef sandwich. If you've seen the movie, I'm sure you remember it. Cooked chicken livers mixed with onions and spices came together to create the chicken liver sandwich. Now, out of all the ones on the list, this one has probably stood the test of time the most rigidly. You'll still find it in the odd bistro or cafe here and there. Preparing it is a bit of work, but for those who want to expand their sandwich arsenal, this is a worthy addition. You'll need celery, red onions, curry powder, salt and pepper, and lettuce of your choice. Once you've mixed your meat with your vegetables and spices, it's time to get cooking in a 350-degree skillet and mix well. Once it's all ready, assemble your sandwich and see just why this was so popular around the 1940-1960s. I don't need to tell you about how much America and the West in general love rice pudding. It's been something that's helped rural and urban populations get through some disastrously tough times, as well as a warm memory from childhood for a lot of people. One variation of the classic rice pudding was a Swedish rice ring, which would mostly be served at Christmas or a family get-together, but it eventually extended into daily use too. The dish first started off as something you'd only find in Scandinavian communities, and they'd really make heaps of the stuff. Enough to go around a big family of 6 or 8 with a bowl for each, and it makes sense too since it was made using some pretty average ingredients. Stuff like rice, milk, and cream were all you needed to get a Swedish rice ring going. The way it differed from normal rice pudding is in how the dish was originally always made with some kind of spice and topped with fruit or served alongside jam. Later on, when it expanded past the Scandinavian locale and got adopted into widespread use, people started using nutmeg and cinnamon as well. Some scant cookbooks might still recall the dish and the times where it was a great comfort meal, but a lot of the new ones don't really remember it anymore. Okay, not the sawdust in the literal sense, but the breadcrumbs or other leftovers that created the dry and crumbly feel of the pie. It was made sweeter, flavored with spices, and baked into a product that looked like a dessert. The main ingredient was frugality. Staple ingredients such as flour and sugar were rationed, and therefore cooks had to make do with available ingredients. Breadcrumbs, crushed crackers, or even ground nuts, if one had been fancy, became the base for this pie. A little molasses or syrup added, and you'd have a dish that might not win the bake-off but can do the job of satisfying a craving in the middle of the night. The name sawdust pie alone would turn anyone's stomach, but it was actually food and, I must admit, rather creative. It was not about opulence. It was about turning the essence of food into a dessert, literally a crumb. Today, there are still recipes for sawdust pie, but they use coconut and pecans to make it a little bit more fancy. Would I try it? Of course, if someone says it is the new style and not the original straight from the Dust Bowl, because even a pie that goes by the name of sawdust needs a bit of appreciation, doesn't it? Here's a sandwich combo that might make you do a double take. Peanut butter and mayo sandwich. Yes, you heard that right. Before PB&J sandwiches became a thing, peanut butter and mayo sandwiches was all the rage. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, this one tastes far better than it sounds. In the 1930s, peanut butter and mayonnaise were both affordable and readily available, making them a popular pairing. The creamy, salty peanut butter mixed with the tangy mayo created a unique flavor combination that some people swear by to this day. It might sound strange, but remember, during the Great Depression, you ate what you could afford, and this sandwich was cheap and filling. So, if you're feeling brave and want to try something new, make yourself a peanut butter and mayo sandwich. Who knows, you might discover a new guilty pleasure. It's not just cloth napkins and towels. Cloth nappies help a lot too. They're a lot better for saving than disposable ones, and they actually do work just as well. Is that really what you want to be spending extra on? Extra expensive diapers? You really don't need to be doing that. Hey, saving is all about cutting the corners that need trimming, and you got to get used to that. This is especially true for families who are just starting out and can't seem to find a comfortable routine or rhythm with their finances just yet. Scrapple is pretty common in Pennsylvania even today, but it started in the 1930s as a mush of pork trimmings with cornmeal or buckwheat and some minimal spices. Since people had limited options for their culinary ventures, most scrapple were not as tasty as they could have been. That does not mean it lacked a kick, though, as most people found that even for trimmings, it worked pretty amazingly overall. People would regularly make it a habit to ask their butcher to save any scraps that were left over or unused because they had some scrapple in mind for today's menu. Especially in the mid-Atlantic in places like Virginia, Delaware, Washington, and South Jersey. People would use offal too and make a broth out of the bones, though in the end any bones and fat were taken out of the dish. Pickles come in pairs with olives, so it is only right to mention cream cheese and olive sandwiches next. Cream cheese was an ingredient that was already a staple in many American homes because of its popularity in desserts around the 1970s. Olives are, well, olives, and if you do not have a bottle always ready to go, you need to reevaluate your grocery shopping list for this month. Mixing the two made both substantially better, like those power-ups Iron Man gets whenever he puts on a bulkier suit. If people felt really fancy, they would put the olives on the stove for a while and have them fried. Not only was it great on its own, but people also did not stop at just frying. Both of them made for really awesome toppings on meat-based sandwiches. We would not mind seeing more olives on our plate today for sure. They are a classic we feel work in any era. You can't have a conversation about classic grandma sandwiches without bringing up the egg salad sandwich. This sandwich started out as an economical way of using up extra eggs. Eggs were a budget-friendly protein source, and this sandwich with just a few ingredients from the pantry. This one also used mayo to bind the sandwich together, but some grandmas added a bit of mustard for a tangy kick. This was a post-Easter favorite, as after the holiday ended, There were plenty of hard-boiled eggs on hand, and of course Graham didn't let anything go to waste. You can make this one yourself with some store-bought egg salad, but it won't taste the same as it did back in the day. A bologna salad sandwich created with bologna mixed with pickles, onions, and mayonnaise certainly sounds like a good combo. There is some grim history attached to the sandwich, though, as it may have been used as rations for military rations in World War II during times of meat shortages. The sandwich's recipe went through a lot of changes across the decades, but traditionally there would be diced bologna, mayo, celery, and some onions. These ingredients were cost-effective and could be rationed out easily, hence the bologna salad sandwich was a regular lunch option for many people at the time. The stage for this dish goes all the way to Cleveland, Ohio, in 1970. The part of Ohio I'm specifically talking about is South Euclid, and the company I want to tell you about is Amster Pizza Bagel, Inc. They first submitted the idea for pizza bagels to the Copyright Office in 1970, which was the first official birth of the dish. However, the idea was pretty much cooking up a long while before it got the fine print out of the way. You can credit Anthony DeMauro for that, since the actual first time he made one was in 1957. 13 years of messing around with and perfecting the recipe led to a show stealer of a product for Amster Pizza Bagel Inc., which a lot of other fast food chains found hard to compete with. They even had a catchy mid-90s slogan, which you'll probably remember if you were a millennial from those times. Pizza in the morning, pizza in the evening, pizza at supper time, with an earworm of a jingle to go along with it. Simple as it sounds. Cooked the flour in water and made dumplings. Now, I know you're wondering, that sounds like something you'd make on a sad Tuesday when you have nothing else in the pantry. Well, you're not wrong, but during the Dust Bowl, this was a hearty way to fill up a family when food was so scarce that even the pantry felt empty. The components in this dish were as simple as 1, 2, or 3: flour, water, and a pinch of salt. The dough was then molded into small balls and then placed in boiling water to be cooked. Yes, it was simple, but it was satisfying and had enough carbs to get people through the day. If you were lucky, you could put some herbs or a pinch of whatever spices remained to make it taste better. But mostly it was about existence, not feasting. The beauty of this dish was that it could be made in large batches, and while the flavor may not have been over the top, it could feed a family when they needed it most. The flour was the only real staple many families had, and it became the base for many meals. This simple dumpling dish was an example of how a little could be turned into something more. Okay, this one is a bit of a curveball. Cold milk soup? But hey, desperate times call for desperate measures. Cold milk soup was a Depression-era staple, and it's exactly what it sounds like. This dish has Amish origins and was one of the most popular meals back in the day. It was also pretty simple to whip up. Take some milk, mix in sliced bananas, a bit of sugar, and sometimes even bread or other fruits. And there you have it, cold milk soup. It might not sound like much, but for many families, this was a quick and easy way to get some calories and nutrients, especially when fresh ingredients were hard to come by. The bananas added some natural sweetness, while the milk provided protein and fat. It was a simple, no-cook meal that could be thrown together in minutes and was perfect for those hot summer days when turning on the stove was the last thing you wanted to do. Roosevelt coffee was a beverage that people both created and drank much more out of necessity than commonly shared caffeine preferences or a newly acquired taste. People needed to make their coffee rations last as long as possible, and one trick they found out that greatly extended the duration of a batch was to reuse grounds. With the U.S. already rationing coffee to a pound per household every 5 weeks, things were rough. The end product was a thin and watery drink that tasted close enough to a fresh cup while taking the real worries of spending more than they were able to on coffee off of people's shoulders. Honestly, it was not that bad either, and it was named Roosevelt coffee in honor of the president if you wanted some historical trivia to spice the drink up further. If you ever find yourself not being able to get some fresh grounds, maybe try making a batch of this and see how you find it. You may be just as surprised as Americans back then with each sip. Something people always were fond of doing back then was fixing and maintaining their own shoes. They didn't even have the cultural emphasis on sneakers we do today. Nowadays, your shoes count for a lot more of your outfit than they did for people of the past. I mean, hey, having nice and ready shoes was still important then, but now it's like you might get dissed for it. Which is why I think knowing how to fix and maintain your own shoes, reselling them, replacing those laces, and knowing your way with some shoe polish, all of that's really important. In Texas, as well as New York, rice with raisins started becoming a really popular dish among the middle class and a breakfast that many children grew up on, especially in Indian American communities, which were sparse at the time, but they were still there every other block or two. It was already customary to eat rice with milk and raisins there, so they brought it to America, and others took note. They were not the only ones to introduce it, though, since Chinese Americans also had their own take on the recipe that led to a more custard-like variant. When people could not afford to even eat rice pudding, they would make their rice and eat it with different kinds of nuts and raisins. The idea spread like wildfire in states like Alabama and Arkansas and the Midwest overall. In Michigan, it was a pretty common choice to use brown sugar and cinnamon whenever available. You have not seen experimental until you have seen a tuna and apple sandwich. Exactly what it sounds like and worse in reality than in your imagination, a tuna salad mixed with chopped apple slices on white bread. Yes, that is literally the entire concept. And no matter what the fusion food crowd tries to say, we are not trying it or buying into the hype. If only to satisfy the curiosity inside us and scratch that must-try everything itch, would we want this back. But strangely, people in the 70s had the opposite opinion. Cans of Pink Lady tuna and farmers market apples were apparently their idea of a good meal back then. Do you think they were onto something? Maybe we are jumping the gun and should take a note out of their book about being open to new tastes. The salami and cheese sandwich was another deli favorite. This is another Italian classic. Salami and cheese sandwiches have roots in Italian cuisine, where cured meats like salami were often paired with cheeses in traditional sandwiches. Salami paired well with various cheeses, including provolone, Swiss, or cheddar. So grandma just used whatever was on hand. But for a true salami and cheese sandwich, crusty Italian ciabatta is a must, and it's even better when it's homemade with love. Now salami has been around since ancient Rome, but it became popular in sandwiches during the 20th century as Italian-American communities spread their culinary traditions. This sandwich wasn't really the healthiest choice out there, but Graham loved spoiling us every now and then, and there was no better treat than this bad boy. Now here's something that started out in the bleakest of times but quickly became a sensation throughout America even after the Great Depression ended. You can't ever beat a fried bologna sandwich. I don't care what uptown neighborhood and what fancy restaurant you've been to. Something about that mix of bologna with cheese, mayo, and sometimes even bacon and sausages is unbeatable. It was something that was incredibly beloved by the public right after the Second World War ended, and the Midwest in particular couldn't really ever get enough of it. Diners, homes, rural areas, local breakfast joints, everyone was serving an affordable fried bologna sandwich. It was something you could rely on to both satisfy your taste buds, get you a healthy dose of protein, and not break your wallet if you had it daily, which was really asking for a lot in those times. When the cupboard was empty and the garden was dust, you made rag soup. Well, they did not boil actual rags, praise heavens, but because this soup was made from the scraps so lowly that it was like throwing rags into a pot. Rag soup was made from water, a couple of carrots, or any other vegetable that was left rotten and, at most, a piece of meat or a bone if one were to be lucky. It was thin, hardly spiced, and was stretched to go around the whole family. You can consider it as the soup where the idea is more important than the substance. The beauty of rag soup was that it was a very versatile dish. Got a carrot and a potato? In they go. Found a pinch of salt? Jackpot. It was a meal that was prepared in a time of famine and at the same time creativity. And though it was simple, it gave heat and food during the worst conditions. Rag soup is evidence of the fact that Dust Bowl families were able to survive and cook something tasty even out of the scraps. The Great Depression might not have the most appetizing recipes, but the era did give the world the Kraft macaroni and cheese dinner. In 1937, Kraft heard about a salesman for the Tenderoni Macaroni Company of St. Louis going rogue and selling his noodles with packets of Kraft grated cheese attached. They hired the man to promote the concept and started selling it to cash-strapped Americans at the low price of 19 cents for 4 servings. Some variations of this comfort food even included cooked vegetables or even a can of tuna. It was a great way to feed the family without spending a lot of money, and it quickly became a favorite for kids and adults alike. Even today, it remains a beloved comfort food. It was rare to get protein from actual meat during that period, but that didn't stop people from fulfilling their cravings by dabbling in mock cuisine, such as the popular mock fish fillet. While this did not actually use fish, it imitated the texture and flavor with pints of milk brought to boil, ground rice, chopped onion, and leeks, with the end being a good stir in a properly beaten egg. What you had was an excellent mimicry that felt close enough to the real thing while being distinct and offering a new experience. Nowadays, this recipe is used in vegan communities, but its origins come from very anti-vegan places, and it would be a great substitute for actual fish and chips as well. Another thing that people always did was prepare their own homemade snacks. People would make granola bars at home or bake their own little potato chips and corn chips, and it was actually such a nice thing to do because you wouldn't have to take out so much money for literally just 2 or 3 bites of a snack. Plus, these days, snacks cost as much as an outside meal from a restaurant does. It's actually a little insane, you know? Do you know what a jar of Nutella costs nowadays? Isn't it so much easier to just bake some cookies at home and call it a day? This recipe really made a name for itself during the mid-1930s to 40s when people were facing a dire shortage of eggs. Still, if you did not have even some potatoes on hand but still wanted a pancake to cheer your kids up, you would go for eggless pancakes. Some shortening, sugar, milk, and salt were all you needed to make this version of the beloved American dish, plus just some water to bind if you could not find any milk to spare. Lucky were the homes that had lard, as that really made for some fluffy and thick cakes, but complaining was not really something people did during those times. A simple recipe like this let them revisit the taste of pancakes from back when they had fully stocked fridges, after all. Olives might not make a comeback anytime soon in today's world, but they will return on the list with egg and olive sandwiches. Like we said, olives were starting to get really hot as the ideal sandwich topping. Adaptable, flexible, and cheap is all you want out of an accessory to your sandwich. Like those fancy earrings that go perfect with your dress, olives and eggs went together like a Cupid-certified match made in heaven. People went wild around the mid-1970s for hard-boiled eggs and salted olives in their sandwich, green or black. Black olives got a bit more traction with eggs though, whereas greens synergized better with peanut butter. Would you ever try a sandwich that consists only of an egg and a fruit? By the way, you did know olives are fruits, right? Remember what chilly days at Graham's called for back in the day? If you guessed hot turkey sandwich, you're absolutely right. This sandwich was another one of Grandma's delicious ways of using up leftover turkey from Thanksgiving. This sandwich featured slices of tender turkey served hot, often open-faced, with a generous ladle of rich, savory gravy poured over the top. Sounds delicious, right? Grandma made her hot turkey sandwich special with the gravy. Whether she made it from scratch with turkey drippings or used a trusted recipe, the rich gravy soaked into the bread, making each bite juicy and flavorful. She knew that nothing went to waste, and the hot turkey sandwich was a delicious way to make the most of those leftovers. Are you a big fan of deli food? Deli meats, sandwiches, loaves, that kind of thing? Then one of the best parts of that kind of eating was the olive loaf. It was usually made with pork and beef plus chopped green olives, which is what it became known for. There was a small, brief period before convenience foods started taking over America, where processed meats were really becoming a thing, and this dish was a big part of that time, which arguably spanned all over the 1940s to the 1970s. It had an extremely loyal fan base too, as this was responsible for many deli counters still staying in business. These days, you could find retro stalls that still do a mean olive load, but the days where this was a commonplace item on the street and something you'd see your grandma cooking up are long gone in America's history. People definitely remember the flavors of the bologna, the ham loaves, and all the amazing dips they came with, though. Everyone knows that potatoes are a comfort food, but during the Dust Bowl, even the potato plant was used in ways that would make today's food bloggers cringe. Enter boiled potato vine soup, an ingenious creation that's about as far from the baked potato as you can get. It is the potato plant, the vines of which became an important food source when all other sources were depleted. The vines, which are normally thrown away, would be collected by the farmers, washed and boiled in water to make a soup. The broth was not very rich and had an earthy taste. Nothing special, but it would keep a man alive when he had nothing else. The vines also have nutrients that could sustain you, but it was more of a survival thing rather than something you'd want to eat. The soup was accompanied by what else was available, or perhaps one or two remaining vegetables or a pinch of salt. While today we may crinkle our noses at potato vine soup, it was a blessing during the Dust Bowl when any green and growing thing was fair game. At times, it is not about exotic tastes, but about survival of the fittest in this case being food. That wraps up 2 hours of forgotten frugal meals your grandparents used to survive. Tell us which one surprised you most, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more.